Hello and welcome, Inspired Podcast community. This is your new episode. My name is Caroline, and my today's guest is Tom Fox, and I'm so happy that he said yes to our episode today. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you, Carolyn.
Wow, perfect. And I would love to introduce you to the audience, of course. You are the number one voice of compliance and founder of the Compliance Podcast Network, featuring 60 award-winning podcasts. You have written 28 books on compliance, business ethics, and leadership, including the Compliance Handbook. You also co-founded the Texas Hill Country Podcast Network, and you have authored 3 best-selling children's books on compliance. Welcome to the Inspired Podcast, Tom Fox.
Thank you very much.
My first question to you is, what inspired you to create the Compliance Podcast Network, and how have you managed to keep the content engaging across such diverse topics?
So I started podcasting in 2012 in the area of legal and regulatory compliance. And in 2017, I got the bright idea to found a network. And there are 3 major trade groups in my area of compliance. So I went to each of them and said, let's create a consortium and pool all of our podcasts. And we'll be the only resource for information on compliance in the podcast format. It will not take away from anything you're doing. It'll just be an adjunct, and I could get no interest. So I said, bleep it, I'll do it myself. And so I did. And I putzed along for a couple of years, really didn't have much traction. And so in 2019, I decided that I had to fully commit or move it to hobby status. So I quit my other job, which was the practice of law. And I fully committed. I bought all the cool toys that you see. I built this huge network. And at the end of the year, I'd made about $10,000. And I thought, well, that was an interesting experiment. Just have to go back to real work. And then I did that for a little bit until basically March 15 of 2020, when America was shut down for COVID. And so what happened was, starting about May 15, every product provider in compliance called me with the same question, which was, how long to get access to your network? Because prior to COVID, almost all marketing had been done in person: conferences, trade shows, breakfast roundtables, in-company events, those sorts of things. And of course, that was not available. And they all said, we've got this huge marketing budget and we need to spend it. So I said, well, the answer to your question is 24 hours. Because of all the work I'd done the year before, it literally was a drop and drag, or a plug and play to get them up and running. And my little world, my little podcast network exploded. And since that time, I've been doing podcasting full time.
That is really inspiring, and I understand the evolving. So you started 2012, you said, and
Yes.
then you thought about quitting, and you did for a little period of time. So you jumped also into it full time because you committed to it, and then you had setbacks, so to say, and then it exploded, and now you are where you are.
That's exactly what happened.
Okay, so let me ask you, how do you balance writing technical books on compliance with creating children's literature on the same topic? What motivated you to write for younger audiences?
Well, I have to say, I let this guy talk me into it. I met a guy who has a publishing company and he publishes children's books. And but his focus is, it's always the same. My mother is an accountant, my father's a teacher, my mother's a coach, my father's a lawyer. And it's designed to teach children what their parents do. And I thought, well, that's kind of interesting. And I don't know how I did, but I let him talk me into it. And so I did the first book, which was about being a compliance officer, which is called Being a Compliance Officer is Awesome. And I released it the week before Christmas 2022. Within 5 days, it was my biggest selling book ever. It was hugely popular. I cannot tell you why. I cannot give the reason, but I had 25,000 hits on LinkedIn. And so it was so popular, he came back to me and signed me for 2 more books. So I had a 3-book deal, and we published the first 3, and it's just hugely popular. Parents use it to teach their kids about compliance, but a lot of companies actually use them to teach their employees. And so every story I have on my website, I have a designated charity. It's called Pawtastic Friends, and they are in the dog rescue arena. And what they do is they give dogs what they call enrichment training to make them more adoptable. So every story features something about rescue dogs, like going to the dog rescue planet or rescuing dogs or adopting dogs. And so there's, animals are in there. So I really, I guess the best thing I can say is I stumbled upon it and it just worked. In fact, today I'm actually hand delivering 100 copies of one book to a compliance professional, and she's going to pass them around her company to help teach them about compliance.
Wow, I love that. So you use simple language, I could say, so that I can understand because I'm not a native English speaker, so I can understand, and other adults as well. So you you talked about employees, and it's I like how you combine the rescue dogs, something that children love, right, with the serious topic of compliance as well.
Yes,
I understand. It's easy. It's easy how you explain it. And I love that. So you found something that there was a demand for it. It was not already there. Someone had to do it, and it was you.
it was me.
Okay. What do you consider the key challenges in compliance today, and how can companies better address these through leadership and ethics?
The key challenges are in compliance are simply doing business ethically and in compliance, literally anywhere in the world. It all starts with leadership, or what we would call tone at the top. If you if your management is not committed to doing business ethically and in compliance, the company won't, because the employees will do what they see the leaders do. So it all starts at the top. The leaders have to communicate it. Then compliance professionals like myself, what we do is we create the infrastructure or the framework to do compliance. So we write policies, we enact procedures, and then we train on it. And the key is to manage your highest risk. There are certain parts of the world that are more risky than others, at least around bribery and corruption. So you have to be more careful there. You have to have greater oversight and greater monitoring. It does not mean you can't do business there. You certainly can, but you cannot, or you must do it carefully with a second set of eyes on everything you do. So it's about having a process. I see compliance as a business process, and once you put the business process in place and train people on it, then you monitor their actions to make sure everything runs smoothly.
Yeah, I understand. So when I studied economics, it was not a required topic. It's 20 years ago. But then after that, they have to study this, and it's so important, and when you talked about other countries in the world and corruption or something, it's important to, I think, also to understand the cultures. So what does it have to do with cultures in other countries?
Certainly, culture is of paramount importance, and things that work in the United States may not work in Central Asia, or they may not work in the Far East, or they may not work in West Africa. So you have to be culturally sensitive. But it's not that these countries want to engage in bribery. People in business don't want to have to do that. They hate it. It doesn't, if it's part of their culture, they may have to do it to get along, but they really don't want to. So if you can bring in a way to do business differently, you're going to actually start to change an entire culture in a country. And that's one of the reasons I'm so excited and passionate about this field.
Yeah, I love that. So I understand culture is also a part of when you were or where you were raised, where you were born, right? And it is like you inhale it with your family. And if you are not used to follow those principles, you implement in the companies, right? So it is strange to you, and you have to learn it. And maybe people refuse it because it's new. So this is where your children's book come into play, right? So you can teach this from an early age on.
So let me give you the best example of that. A key part of a compliance program is what we call in America speak up. So if you see something, raise your hand and say something. If you see an illegal act, if you see an unsafe act, some places call it whistleblowers, some places call it hotline reporting. Right now, the favored words are speak up. And so when my daughter was about 15, I asked her if she knew what a whistleblower was. And I explained to her what it was. And she looked at me and she says, "Yeah, Dad, we call that a rat." And I thought, we have a problem here. And so I thought about that for a long time. And so that's the reason I wrote a book about speaking up. So the story is they're going to the dog rescue planet. Something happens on the spaceship, and the engineer hides it, and a young um, crew member struggles with whether they should go over the engineer's head and report it to the captain, and eventually they do, and it saves the spaceship. Uh, d- Speaking up doesn't have to be an illegal act; it can be a safety issue, or it can be doing something better. So that's an important part as well.
Yes, I understand. So you pack the principles or whatever the message you want to transport in stories. Yeah, storytelling. And I love
Yes,
that with the spaceship and the engineer, and it makes it more like not visible, but we can imagine we have a story in mind, and then by we don't have to think about it. When you read this book, then you will implement the message, right?
right.
Wow, I love that so much. So thank you so much for our interview. I have more questions, of course, about your goals. Do you set goals or intentions for yourself? And what is one of your next projects or books?
Well, I'm writing 3 books right now. One is sort of lessons learned for compliance professionals. The handbook you mentioned, I update that annually, so I'm starting that updating process. And the one I'm having the most fun with is the following. I'm a huge fan of Star Trek, the original series. And every summer, I do a podcast series, a daily podcast series called Trekking Through Compliance, which is compliance and ethics lessons from Star Trek, the original series. And this summer, I've done it 7 years, and this summer I redid it for afresh for the first time in a couple of years. And I rediscovered my love for Star Trek and compliance. So I'm writing a book on the top 10 compliance lessons from Star Trek. So those are the books I'm working on. On podcasts, I think I have, I don't know, I've always got 5 or 6 in development. So
Mhm.
I have 5 or 6 more. I start 3 or 4 podcasts a month. I, my my charm and my curse is I have one switch, and that's on and off. And once the on switch goes on, I can't stop. So I don't have a dimmer switch. So I get an idea and I start a new podcast.
I love that. We have something in common. But I have only, yeah, I have 3 podcasts, but I don't start 3 every month. So yes, it's very impressive. And one of my questions is always, where can we find you when people reach out to you or they want to connect? But I think everyone finds you. But maybe you can mention a website or.
Sure. So the Compliance Podcast Network is found at www.compliancepodcastnetwork.net. You can connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm at Thomas R. Fox. I'm on Twitter at tfoxlaw. You can email me at tfox@tfoxlaw. Um, and I'd love to talk to anybody about compliance, about podcasting, about writing children's books, or anything else you want to talk about.
Oh, I love that. Thank you so much. Please reach out to Tom. He's amazing. He shares his knowledge and wisdom, and the people don't have that information yet, but you bring it into the world. Of course, it's so important. Thank you so much for our interview. And now it's time for something you want to add before we close. Yes.
Something I want to add before we close. Everyone, everyone needs a podcast, period. Every business, every person, if you're in the corporate world, or if you're a professional, you need a podcast. What should your podcast be on? Whatever you want. Because there is no better way to build your own personal brand. There's no better way to build your professional brand. And there's no better way to meet people like you. I mean, we met literally across the world because of our joint love of podcasting. So if you've ever thought about starting a podcast, I've written books on that, starting a podcast. So I'm more than happy to talk to anyone. The cost to entry is, I don't want to say zero, but certainly less than $500. And you will share your voice, and your story is important to share.
Thank you. I totally agree with that. This is also the reason I started my podcast, to connect people all over the world and to be a living example of that making a difference is possible, and bringing the light and peace into the world, of course, also my message. And to encourage everyone to start their own podcast. I am also here to help, and Tom is here, and I'm so happy we are now together and connected. Thank you so much for our interview.
It's been my pleasure.
And have the best day ever.